very much. So thinking about somebody who is in trouble or has been in trouble, and we're talking serious trouble. It may not last, maybe temporary, maybe long term. I'll give you some examples without revealing names of people, of course. But in my career, I've been working in various aspects of psychology, either as a professor or as an applied person for a long time. And at one chapter in my life, I decided to go and work in a maximum security prison for men. And they asked me to teach psychology classes to people who were in prison for 25 years to life. They had been there after the courts had told them, you're incarcerated. It's not just a temporary jail situation. Prison means you're in there for a very long time. And so our local college went indoors, inside the walls, and I was one of the professors. And I think I learned more from them than they ever learned from me. But who am I in their lives? It's fascinating. More recently, I retired from teaching at Bernathen College, and now in my, every Wednesday, I help social workers who are dealing with women who just left prison last week or last month, and they're trying to reintegrate in society. It's a very vulnerable time for them. Their families are mad at them, they have no money, they may not have a place to live or sleep tonight, they don't know where their next meal is coming from, they may or may not have career skills. If they stole in the past, they can't get a job that involves money, like working at the mall. And so they're kind of stuck and feeling pretty full of self-loathing. They're very vulnerable. So we try to have a support group to help them figure out, well, how can you trust that good things will happen next? And what can you do? And we help them step by step. I haven't had as much experience working in hospitals. Maybe some of you have. But I've certainly had very ill people in my family. Little things like my children getting asthma, to my mom having some serious illness before she died. So I know what it feels like to go visit. I don't feel very adequate because I'm not medically trained, but I really honor Roz and others who know what to do when she walks into a big hospital. She rolls up her sleeves and gets right to work. So visiting is not always because you're adequately trained. Sometimes it's your demeanor, your manner. I've also worked with people who are really struggling with feeling vulnerable to evil influences. I work with addicts. Right now I'm an advocate for abused children. In almost all of the cases of abuse that I'm dealing with, one or both of the parents are addicted to some really harsh substances. And they're trying to get well, but boy, that addiction just pulls them right back to opiates or heroin or whatever. So my job is to work with trying to figure out, are the children going to be safe there? Do I trust that they'll get better? But you've got to meet them where they are and figure things out. It's problem solving. In my opinion, it's very good to strengthen one's faith by studying doctrine. I've done that a lot. Learned a lot from other people, studied myself. But right now I'm in a phase of doing. So in my retirement, I spend a lot more time trying to figure out how can I help others. Maybe you have the same calling in some way or another. And it could be in small ways, it could be in big ways. But let's just go over here and review some of the 6 ways to serve the neighbor. We talked the other day about when somebody is hungry, it corresponds in the internal sense, according to Swedenborg, to people who are longing for goodness. They're attracted to a place like this. They're attracted to maybe a nice neighborhood where they might see other good people and they might be able to belong to that. It's a totally normal, healthy thing to long to belong with other people. Thirsty is when we want doctrine. We want to learn truths that we can then maybe apply to our lives. And we're trying to figure out, is there any meaning in life? Some people regularly go and study. Other people go and hear sermons. Other people listen to things. And there are times when we're really thirsty and other times, I've had enough. And so when we're with other people, we have to decide how much truth are they thirsty for if I'm trying to figure out my role in their life. The estranged is corresponding to somebody who is a seeker. They're on some kind of a journey at their own pace, and they're trying to figure out how to apply truths to life. And so how do we recognize somebody as seeking? By the questions that they ask, and how do we answer them? So today we're going to talk more about the other 3. Jesus says, if you provide clothing for people who are naked or needing protective clothing, it corresponds to dealing with people who are feeling very little hope. They've gotten to a very serious part of their life and they're feeling hopeless. So let's just pause for a minute. Do you want to run the other direction when you hear somebody who's lost hope? Do you want to be there for them? Could you identify with that? Have you ever had a time when you felt low in terms of hope? If you're willing, without revealing names of friends or family that are in your mind, but just the whole concept of, can I offer and reach out and provide protective truths when somebody is feeling like life has no meaning, I want to end it all. They might even be suicidal. Would you please be willing to talk to somebody next to you? Only share as much as you're willing to, because this is delicate, I know that. But share with each other what's it like if you've ever dealt with somebody who was really low on hope, and did you feel like you wanted to reach out to them and give them some hope in some way? How did that go? Go ahead and talk to each other for a few minutes, and I'll call you back. Okay, let's get that together in a minute, please. So, according to Swedenborg, nakedness at a spiritual level means nakedness at a spiritual level means one who acknowledges that there is nothing of good or truth in themselves. They look in the mirror and they can't, mirror on the wall, there is nothing good or true in me. And that leads to hopelessness. That's despair. One scholar of Swedenborgian ideas is a man named Reverend Eric Buss. I really honor that he has studied this extensively. He shared with me that some people do not know how to be good and may not even want to learn how to be good at that state. So they may not be as receptive as the person who is a spiritual stranger who is seeking. At that state, they may not think there's ever going to be any good or truth in them. So who are we in their lives? Just like a child who goes outside and it suddenly starts to rain or snow, you want to run out there and put a clothing over them, don't you? Or a raincoat. You're offering protective clothing. Clothing corresponds to protective truths. So what would be an appropriate truth to share to somebody who is in despair? Any ideas? Anybody?
I'm here.
You're here. That's something huge, isn't it? That you haven't run away. Yes?
Well, now we were talking about just authentically saying, yeah, this was really horrible what you're going through.
Yeah.
Acknowledge the reality and also acknowledging the truth of the strengths that that person has shown. Yeah, it sucks, but look at that. You get up and go to work every day.
Yeah. So you affirm even the littlest things that involve being functional. That's a great one. And I love the first part, which is you're reflecting back what you hear about their depth of despair. So learning your practice of really paraphrasing what somebody else's experience is without judgment is a really good tool to use at that time. It's probably not a good idea to say, oh, have a stiff upper lip, everything will be sunny tomorrow. Not a good idea. It may sound cute in a song, but not when you're really trying to meet people where they are. Yeah.
In hospice, we're trained to ask people, how have you dealt with difficult situations before?
Wonderful.
To remind
They may
them.
have skills. They have been resilient maybe before. When they got bad news medically, or they knew they were going to die, or they knew that they're going to have to live on as a widow, and they really are having trouble with that. What have they done before? That's wonderful. So it's implying that they might be able to be resilient and draw from things they knew before. Maybe they have even favorite phrases like reading the Lord is my shepherd, which is really a story about somebody going through the valley of death. But you fear no evil. I mean, that's a really powerful one. When my dad was dying, that was his favorite. He wanted us to read that over and over to him again. The Swedenborg also talks about when we die, we go to the world of spirits, and these wonderful welcoming angels are there, and they see you transparently. They see everything that's in your mind and heart. And the really good celestial angels look for the good in you, like trying to find something that's resilient. Even if the person is saying, oh, I'm a schmuck, I'm terrible, I'm this, I'm that, I'm useless, hopeless. So they just look for something good in there, and they zoom in on that. So that's another model for us of try to figure out something that's good and see if you can find it, because they've forgotten it. Remember, they think they have nothing they've ever done good or any truth. They've been a failure in some way or another, and our job is eventually to help them, maybe listen for a long time, eventually helping them find something that maybe they can climb out of that hole. Okay, let's talk about the second one, or actually in our scale here it's number 5. Count all 6. Visiting the sick. And again, you don't have to have adequate skills like my friend Roz, who knows how to handle very ill people. But visit. Let's just focus on the word visit. And we need it for both this one and the one about visiting people who are literally or spiritually imprisoned. So just picture yourself going to a prison. Now raise your hand if you've ever visited a prison. Okay. They might double check to make sure who you are. Did you bring any weapons? They may pat you down like they do at the airport. They may take away your keys. They really want to be sure that as you come in and visit, so it's a little intimidating to even just walk in. And I used to walk in every day for 5 years, or 5 days a week. And so I remember that. But then once you're there with the inmate, sometimes there's barriers between you and them. Sometimes you're allowed to sit in a room like this, but there's guards everywhere. Sometimes it's limited because you're only allowed to be there 10 minutes. But let me just share with you an interesting sad statistics. Research has been done that says mothers who go to jail, way over 2/3 to 3/4 of all mothers in jail do not ever get visited by their kids. They might be there 2 years, 10 years. And there are children accommodations. They have like we have a nursery. They have places where they have toys. You're allowed to bring children in. Imagine if you have grown children and you go to jail, and most of them don't visit. So Talk to the person next to you. How do you think it feels? Let's have some empathy for the person who's in jail and their immediate family, especially their young or grown children, won't visit. Talk to each other. How does that imprisoned person feel? Okay, let's hear some words. If you're getting in the shoes of a person who's in prison and they're not getting visited very often, especially from their children, that was one example, but even men don't always get very many visitors. What's your empathy saying? How are they feeling by not being visited? Alone, good. Ashamed, that's a biggie. Lots of shame. Lots of self-loathing. Any other ideas? How are they feeling?
They were abandoned.
Yes. Exactly. So let's then also think about people who are sick. Maybe they're in hospice, like you go visit them on a regular basis. Maybe they're in a hospital for a short time and they're going to get well. Or they're just sick at home for days or weeks or months. That's a more familiar experience. So how many of you have ever been sick for more than a week? How about anybody been sick for more than a month? Really couldn't leave home or a hospital bed. Okay, so what's that like to be there? What's it like for you, Trevor, when you were really sick? Boring. Especially if people don't come visit you. What was it like for you when you were sick? Lonely? Okay. So you can see why Jesus has said, pretend those people in prison or in sick beds are Jesus. And treat them as if they were Jesus. The least of them, my brethren. We've all been the least when we've been sick or down and out. And so Jesus is saying, visit. So let's just talk about the word visit. Now this is my pulling from the writings directly, pulling from Reverend Eric Buss's research, and my own dad. My dad was Reverend Lord Sonison, and he studied this very carefully. So he had his own interpretation. And I've pulled them all together. And I think visiting is really amazing. It sounds like you just come in and sit down in a chair. But think about your demeanor when you're visiting somebody who's stuck in bed or stuck behind bars for a long period of time. And if we have empathy, even if we've never been a prisoner, if we've never been in a long-term illness, we can try to have perspective taking. And we can try to identify with the loneliness, with the boredom, or the hopelessness, perhaps, if you have a long-term, maybe death-threatening illness. But not to say, I know just how you feel. Why is that not a great phrase? It is. We can't completely know how they feel. We can attempt to try and have compassion, but not say, oh yeah, I had a brother, he was sick once. Yeah, I know all about it. That sounds a little too uppity or like I know it all. Yes?
It also takes it away from the person who's feeling the pain and makes it about the visitor.
Yes.
Kind of centering it on that person rather than focusing on the pain that they're
Very good. We should be more like a mirror, reflecting, trying to be present, and try not to be distracted. Yeah?
Sometimes when you are sick like that, that's what you want.
You want distraction?
You don't want to be focused on what's wrong with you. It might somehow be helpful to see if they're feeling that way about you being sick.
Ah.
They're feeling that way because they care about you, not because they want to solve the situation.
Yeah. I think if we give the imprisoned person or the sick person some choices, today would you like to talk about the cancer? And say it out loud. If you'd rather not, would you rather hear about the news? I'll open the newspaper. Would Would you rather hear about the birthday party we just had for your niece? So giving them choices, because sometimes they really want to talk. I remember this one young woman who was about 20, and she, when she was a teenager, a few years earlier, she watched her mom slowly die of cancer. And she realized that she and her sisters could not quite handle the cancer conversation very often because they were full of grief. So she would do what she could from her sick bed as she was dying to comfort them, but they weren't the person she talked to about cancer. And then even the husband, who was going to be a widow, really didn't want to talk about it either. He would cry a lot. So she found that a journal helped to nobody, just a journal to herself. She could talk as much as she wanted or write as much as she wanted. And then this young woman, 5-10 years later, when she was in college, she wrote her senior essay on the biological and psychological benefits of writing a journal when you're really sick, when you're dying. Isn't that interesting? So there's lots of different ways to, quote, visit. And we can't be everything to all people, of course. But the idea of visiting somebody in a hospital or a prison or in a sick bed is a challenge. It can be very difficult. We don't always know what to say. That's why we have chaplain schools, right? To teach you what to say. Could you share, in addition to the wonderful thing you just said, could you share when people are definitely dying, they're in hospice, what would be appropriate things to say, Susanna? What have you been taught?
For one, just to let people and their families know that we're going to be with them through the process. We're not going to abandon them.
Good.
People who are sick and especially very close to death, they're often, family members are afraid.
Yes.
So just to say, we're not afraid, we'll be here with you. I mean, the nurses, the whole team, the nurses, the social worker, and the chaplains, we're always going to be there, just a phone call away. And ask them, like you said, ask them what they'd like to talk about.
Yes.
And some people will like to talk about how they're leaving things for the family, or how they're, people might say, well, there's someone I'd really like to see, and then we can help make that arrangement.
Yeah.
Basically just not being afraid to talk about anything they want to talk about. And then if
Yes.
they don't want to talk, respecting that. And sometimes people like to just have you pray for them or sing a hymn for them. And we always ask permission for what we're going to offer so that we know that's what's welcome.
I really love that part, asking permission or asking what you would like. It gives a little bit of power back to the patient or the imprisoned person who has lost a lot of power, haven't they? They've lost a lot of empowerment over their lives, either temporarily or long term. So by us giving them a few choices, like, is there somebody you'd like to write a letter to? If your hands don't work, would you like me to help you? Would you like to have a familiar song? Is there somebody you want to be sure doesn't visit you because they agitate you? Giving a little bit of power in those ways, you actually can, that's a very effective way of creating a non-anxious presence. So I love how you say that you're not going to be afraid, and you try to embody non-fear. And for some people that takes a lot of practice. They get agitated, they get wiggly, they're fidgeting, they're looking at their phone, they're scratching, they're finger biting. So to learn, that's one thing that's in our control, is for us to figure out how to be calm. Some of you may have been born with a calm demeanor. I was not. Anybody else born with a lot of energy? And it can be great at sometimes, but it can be in the way when I'm trying to visit and be near other people. So I have to think about my hands, and is my foot wiggling, and am I trying to do something like bend a paper clip 100 different ways, to get some. So I have to practice. Just like people practice meditation, you can practice calmness before you go into a stressful situation, all the noises of a hospital or all the clanging in prisons, and to try to just calm yourself down. It's one of the most important things. And then being present and try not to be distracted and give the other person some choices. Now, looking at the internal sense of sickness, I have focused in my Altruism book on one example. There are many examples you could do, but I focused on an example of very negative feelings that people get sort of sickened by. Negative emotions that might manifest as an addiction. And I use the example of a money addiction or gambling. I live in the Poconos. Everywhere you go, there's another gambling institution popping up. And it's not that all gambling is illegal. People do small amounts all the time. But it can really get to the point of addiction. It kind of crosses a line when your other values, like paying your mortgage and saving money for your kids' college and even promising to pay off the credit card. If all that money goes to addiction and you just get sucked into the whole high of, oh, tomorrow it's going to be my lucky day, Lady Luck is coming. I've seen it a lot, and it's really interesting to watch what happens. So who are we in the life of an addict? Whether it's a heroin addict, an addiction to a substance that's not something you eat, but something that's exciting, like gambling, or it could be a sex addiction. There's all different kinds of things that we can see our friends and neighbors or relatives get sucked into. So, again, without gossiping about an absent person, but trying to imagine, who am I in the life of somebody who's an addict? Do I just stay away? Do I have a role at all? Do I say, let go and let God and just go the other direction? Do I be present? This is hard to decide, isn't it? A lot of people just put up a big boundary and say, I'm not going anywhere near you, I'm not lending you any money, just don't visit. And other people say, come on in, live with me for a while. People have different reactions. Okay, let's go back to your small group. Who am I trying to be a spiritual friend to this person who is really caught up in the addiction? It could be of gambling, it could be another kind of addiction. Who are you in their life? What have you learned? Go ahead. Okay. Thank you for wrestling with that difficult question. It's not that we're going to get all the answers right away, but there is some good coaching out there. If you decide you do want to be in somebody's life who is struggling with an addiction and they're really caught up in it, Al-Anon is one program that can help us figure out, who am I in their lives? When do I separate from them? When do I help? There are other programs out there as well. And I encourage you, if you feel inadequate about what to do, search for ideas. There are things we can do. Doesn't mean we fix them immediately. Remember, we're visiting, we're being present, and letting them know we're here. And we get to embody the Lord going through us, because we're not doing it all ourselves, but we're trying to be non-anxious and calm and try to let them know that there's still something good in them. So the last one, I've been jumping back and forth between different ways to visit, but what if somebody is not literally in prison, but spiritually they're trapped in a false idea? Here's a really common one that I have come across. God has forgotten me, and I wonder if there really is a God. So they're having a spiritual crisis of some kind. Life has really been happening to them, and they may just feel like Where's God in all this? So we have to decide, okay, how do I visit that? But when somebody's stuck in a false idea as deep as that, we have to decide, do I want to be present? Will it rub off on me, and will I start losing faith? It gets tricky, doesn't it? There's some other psychological examples of trapped. You think of the example of OCD. Are you familiar with obsessive compulsive disorder? It's a psychological pattern that happens, and there are ways to deal with it. If you're not a trained therapist, you may not know all those ways, but just to be kind to people who are stuck. And they might be obsessed in their mind or compulsed to go do things like wash their hands 1,000,000 times. They may be running through, oh no, I've got to be somewhere on time. If I'm not there on time, oh no, I'm not on it. And they may just go through it, and it fills their mind. That's what an obsession is. It's hard to have room in there for anything else. And a compulsion could be they spend a lot of time either cleaning or reorganizing. They would look at that bookshelf and go nuts because it's not from high to short. It's not the green ones and the red ones separate from the blue ones, and it's not. They would need to fix that. If you don't have that obsession, you look at the bookshelf and go, oh well, then you don't have OCD. But it's very real for people who have it. They're trying to get safe, and they get trapped in the idea that maybe if I straighten all those things out, or line up all the pens, or straighten up the sidewalk, or something, that maybe their inner anxiety will. And they're trying to figure out how to feel safe and secure again. So you may not fix them in a day or a year. Psychologists have techniques for trying to help people, but at the very least you can be a non-anxious presence who is not filling your head with fear, and just try to be a stable anchor in their lives. Just every once in a while talking about how do you deal with fear. You know, I'm afraid of thunderstorms, and I have a few techniques that I use. If I know the rumble is coming, you know, I'll do certain things. I'll go to a basement where there's not very big windows. I'll put on gorgeous music. I might paint a picture. And then when it's over, I'll look outside, see all the lovely rain, and then about 2 weeks ago, we got struck by lightning at our house, and it hit the tree right next to the house, and the tree came tumbling down, and it was within inches of the house. So that added to my fear of thunder and lightning. We've had 4 trees fall down recently, so there's realism about fear. And you have to decide, how do I get calm again? And use whatever healthy techniques we have. Breathing, associating with good music, whatever it is you use. Anybody else have ideas of how do you deal when your heart is pounding? Either stage fright or heights on a tall mountain, or what do you do when you're trying to get your heart to calm down? Anybody have ideas?
Pray.
Praying. Bring those angels closer. What else do you do? Yes? Chanting. Wonderful. The rhythm of that can be just amazing. Yes? Huh? Breathing. Women who are in labor are taught to breathe very consciously and deliberately because they get often afraid right before the birth happens. Because very often when we're scared, we have shallow little breaths and we desperately need oxygen. So even modeling that for people who are absolutely trapped in fear and they're wanting to be safe, you're teaching them some basic techniques that what has worked for you. They may or may not do it, but you're modeling it. I have aunts and uncles who have taught me over the years ways to deal with their fears. They might think of a funny joke. It sort of breaks the ice in their head, you know? Or they just look at a picture of a baby. So we all have these phones, and it's so great to have pictures of somebody like a puppy, like you, like your kitty cat. Don't you immediately feel good? What happens biologically is oxytocin is this wonderful chemical that goes through your body when you look at a kitty cat or a baby or a sweet grandma. And so if you can pull those ideas, we might get oxytocin to flow and the fear starts to subside, which is great. So in closing, it may be hard to see some people in difficult circumstances and think of them as Jesus. A person in really stinky, ugly clothes who's been living on the street. A person in prison who swears a lot. That person who has not been eating well because they're so addicted to heroin they forget to eat. And you wonder, is it their fault? Maybe it is. They also might be trapped. And so you have to decide, who am I in their lives? And I encourage you to find different ways to reach out beyond your comfort zone. Beyond your comfort zone of your own family, of your own church, or your own neighborhood. So find a social service agency and say, can I help 1 day a week? Whether it's in a food kitchen, whether it's in, like I think you, Sage, were you the one that said that you used to be part of a community where they'd have food? She didn't have to do that, but just go do it. Sit with the people of different economic levels, breaking bread together. So thinking of the different 6 ways and trying to figure out, well, if I'm not adequate in my skills, go learn them. Go follow around a social worker or an addiction counselor and say, what are some basics so I can do sort of like spiritual first aid without being too superior, to meet them where they are and let them know that the Lord loves them. So thank you very much. If anybody has questions or comments, we have a few minutes. Anybody have thoughts they'd like to share? Yes, I see you back there. I think it's Tina?
Can you be addicted to altruism?
Yes, interesting.
You know, you abandon your family because you're
Ah. So if it's addiction in the form of I'm abandoning responsibility and I'm out there doing things for others, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I think we're supposed to try to take care of the various responsibilities we have. And so that's an interesting question. What drives the person to maybe do these at the neglect of these, like your child or something? So it's an interesting thought. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's part of, no matter what we do in life, that we have the boundaries are probably the most important thing. The boundaries will change as the situation changes.
Yeah.
So, at first you might be really involved and trying to help them, and then you might realize that that's not working, and you have to set the boundaries further away. And then they might start doing better, and the boundary will fix that a little bit. The boundary is really key.
Yeah.
Being able to help them.
Interesting. It is good to be mindful of boundaries. Yes, sir.
Well, I would think the answer to, I would find that the answer to that question is being, yes, that is a possibility. If the motivation for the person who appears to abandon basic responsibilities to do helpful things to other people,
Yep.
maybe doing those helpful things for his or her own needs,
Yes.
that his or her own needs are being met
Yeah.
at a fairly low level. I mean, our needs are being met when we help other people,
Sure.
but they're higher level needs.
Right.
So I would say, though, if you have experience in that in some way, it is possible.
Yep. I'm thinking of yesterday when we used this chart over there. And we can't always spiritually judge. In fact, we should never spiritually judge. But we should all examine our own selves. And if our needs, when we're out there ambitiously doing all these things and abandoning our own children or our husband, we might be just doing it because we want to feel good at the moment. We want to feel like we're going to get a reward for the philanthropist of the year. And Swedenborg challenges us to grow in that maturity toward searching for what is good in others. It's really, altruism means the alter, the other, and really focusing on what do they need and who am I in their lives, and looking for the good in them. And it's more about them, and then it's less about us getting a reward. But if we're really looking just for the reward, we're still sort of stuck like an Eagle Scout. Yeah.
One of my favorite George Dole quotes that one of the situations he used it in was when he was talking to people who were down on themselves or feeling hopeless was, God made you and he's no junk.
He doesn't make junk.
It breaks the ice in a way and
Yeah.
brings you spirituality.
Yeah.
He said it was very effective.
It changes the frame from there's nothing of good or truth in me, and that's how people who are spiritually naked, they don't have no protective truths, they're vulnerable to bad influences because they think, well, I'm a mess anyway. But he would change that and say, hey, wait a minute, God made you. There's no junk there. Time for 1 or 2 more thoughts. Yes, Jessie.
Just the idea of visiting. I'm thinking about that word. I just love it. I think you're bringing yourself, which, I used to be sort of afraid of like, well, I don't know what I'm going to say, or where do I don't know anything about, the health part, or,
Yep.
but I found that, talk to you about whatever they want, even just sitting and reading or whatever, just, it's like you're bringing your presence,
Yes.
which is something different and new and probably happier than they are. And,
Yeah.
I just love that. And I've also found that people who visited my husband when he was ill, they really found it to be a gift. And I would say, no, you don't need to come. And they said, but this is making me feel so wonderful. I feel like I'm helping.
Yeah. And I think the Lord is flowing through both, the giver and the receiver. And why does the Lord let things happen like sickness? There's an opportunity there, and somebody else gets to help. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been lovely.